I left a party after a stupid prank, and it tore my family apart. Well, things escalated a lot after I made my last post because I sent it to my parents and other family members after a little while. They were furious with me at first. Some even mocked me saying things like, "Oh, watch what you say or do around him. He might just post about it on Reddit." But when they actually read the comments on my post when I made them, they became mortified. My brother-in-law did agree to pay for a new chair and gave me the money I asked for. I bought a better folding chair than my last one and resumed going to family functions. But whenever I was there was this air about some of the family members. They looked at me like I'd sucked all the fun out of the room. My parents had stopped thinking the chair thing was funny, and even scolded a kid for taking my seat when I got up to use the bathroom. The only problem is that this kid was my nephew. And he started crying when they made him get up. My brother-in-law came to the boys' rescue, and my nephew ended up blurting out that his daddy told him he could do it. When I was out of the bathroom, there was a big fight about it going on. Several family members, including my sister and brother-in-law, were all yelling that it was just a damn chair and I shouldn't be so butthurt about it. My parents demanded to know why they were so butthurt about not being allowed to screw with me anymore. What their motivation after doing it for so long? It made no sense and wasn't funny anymore. And that's when I intervened. I told them none of this crap would have ever happened if they hadn't been so intent on messing with me when there really was no point to it. I only started bringing my own chair because I could never find a stable place to sit. And if they still thought they were in the right about the situation, then they were just bullies, plain and simple. And what kind of example is that to be setting for your son? My brother-in-law raged, grabbed my new chair and hurled it through the living room bay window. There was a bit of a pause before he realized what he'd just done, then he took off in his car and left my sister and nephew there. My parents got my sister to call him, and over the phone they threatened to go to the police if he didn't pay for the damages. He yelled a few swears until my sister took the phone back. She said that he can either make things right or she'll divorce him. Well, that did the trick because he came back looking like a kicked puppy with his head hanging low. He apologized to me and my parents without even looking at us, said he'd pay for the new bay window and left again. My sister said he drank himself to sleep that night. My new chair was just fine. It took being hurled through a bay window like a champ. There was hardly a scratch on it. My brother hired a window company to come and replace the window. And they had to measure and order a new one before it could be installed. Until then the window had to be covered with plywood. The family was still divided about the situation for a while. Mainly my brother-in-law's parents, my uncle, and a couple cousins blamed me and called me obnoxious for insisting on bringing my own chair and refusing to let anyone else use it. So I compromised. I said that if I had a good designated seat that no one will try to take away, I'll leave my chair in my car. It took 2 more family barbecues before they finally agreed to this. Since then I've left the chair in my car unless there really wasn't enough seating. And that's only happened once since. The problem is that even though they stopped screwing with me, they were still screwing with each other until things went too far. They still like to take each other's seats, but I guess others were following my example because they put their feet down and demanded it stop. It's been going on for decades, and they've had enough. My brother-in-law stayed out of the fight entirely and hasn't caused any more trouble. But for several family functions a number of people didn't bother to show up. My mother was broken up about it because she loves hosting parties. It took months, but everything more or less normalized again. Without the chair thing going on, some have resorted to other stupid pranks like a little device you hook to a chair that makes farts. They didn't do this to my seat, but did it to a cousin. This cousin got really petty at the next party and let out real farts. He said he ate a whole pack of fiber bars and had eggs for breakfast. It was damn nasty. Other pranks included hiding eating utensils, a stink bomb, hiding some sort of monster thing in the toilet, putting cellophane in a doorway, ripping paper when somebody bends over, messing with drinks, hiding shoes, and finally the one that really infuriated my aunt and uncle when a party was held at their house, a glitter bomb. They got the carpet professionally cleaned and billed the person who made the glitter bomb for it. So now pranks are just over. They don't want any more, and I'm fine with that. But the last few family functions have been a bit dull. Of course, things were only calm for a little while before even more trouble started up.
My bratty neighbor parked his favorite car in my driveway. So I got rid of it. I'm a single mother of 2 teenage boys and I live in a nice, quiet neighborhood at the end of a cul-de-sac. Every house on this street has a garage and I'm the only one that has a single car and parks in my garage. Almost every house on this street is a family home with at least 3 cars, but most have more. Some will park in their driveway and some will park on the street. It's never been a problem since everyone is considerate on how they park and no one has ever had an issue with getting in and out of the street. In addition, I tend to keep to myself. I'm not antisocial and I wave and say hello to my neighbors when I come and go from my home, but usually when I get home, I stay home. So, I say all of this to give you an idea that I'm a homebody and my neighbors pretty much know that when I get home, I stay home. About 6 months ago, the house to my right was sold to a larger family that consisted of dad, mom, and 3 teenagers. The day they started moving in, I made a point to go over to the edge of the property to wave and greet them in order to welcome them to the neighborhood. They were friendly and I was happy to have such nice people to move in next door. Also note, this family used their garage storage and thus parked their 4 cars in their driveway. I didn't know it at the time, but their youngest son was just months away from his 16th birthday. I received a knock on the door and it was my neighbor, specifically the dad. We'll call him Dad. Dad, good evening, how are you? Me, we're okay. I'm sorry I can't open the door, but my youngest came home from school with a sore throat today and so I'm not sure what's going on with him. How are you and how can I help? Dad, I'm sorry to hear that, I hope it isn't anything serious. We are okay. My son just turned 16 a few weeks ago and I'm sure you saw the new truck we bought him. Me, yes, I did. It's such a pretty truck and big. Does he like it? Dad, yes, he does. It's what he wanted so we got it for him. It is very big and that's what I wanted to talk to you about. Me, I don't understand. Dad, we have been having complaints from some of the other neighbors that his truck is so big that they can't get around it when they are driving through and we're afraid that it might get sideswiped if he continues to park it in the street. Me, yeah, I've had some intense moments trying to get around it myself, but I'm sure he will get better at parking as he gets more experienced. I'm not sure what this has to do with me, I haven't complained. Dad, oh, I know you haven't complained, which is why I was going to ask if he could use your driveway to park since you don't use it. Me, very stunned at this, I do use my driveway when I leave and come home. I can't get to my garage without using my driveway. Besides, I have issues with depth perception and your son's truck is so big it will take up most of my driveway and I don't want to be responsible for any damage that might happen while it is on my property. Dad, well, we will make sure that he parks so that it will allow you to come and go without any issues. Me, that isn't possible. The only way he can park to allow me to get around him is if he parks halfway on my lawn and that wouldn't work because then he would damage my lawn. If you are concerned about his truck getting damaged then why don't you let him park in your driveway and then one of your other smaller cars can park in the street? Dad, we've already discussed that and we would have to park 2 cars in the street in order for him to use the driveway. It would be very easy for him to park in your driveway and I can assure you that it will not be an inconvenience to you. You don't even use your driveway. Me, I'm sorry, but the answer is no. I'm not going to be responsible for his vehicle on my property and I need to be able to come and go without worrying about someone else's property. Dad, very upset. At this point, you are not being very neighborly. I thought you were a nice woman. You don't use your driveway and this would benefit the whole neighborhood. Me, losing my temper at this point, listen, I told you no and I do use my driveway every time I pull into my garage and every time I leave. I'm sorry you don't have enough parking for all your vehicles, I'm sure it's frustrating, but it's not my problem that you decided to buy a vehicle that didn't fit your property. Now, while I also find it irritating to try to navigate the road with that truck in the way, it is public parking and so I deal with it. I will not have anyone else's vehicle parking on my property. Now, if you don't mind, I have a sick kid and need to get back to him. Have a good day. With that I closed the door and then looked out the peephole and saw him give me the bird before he turned to leave. I just shook my head and had to take a moment to understand that I actually just had that conversation. I then loaded my son up in the car and left to take him to minor emergency to get him checked out. All tests came back negative and I was told he probably had a run-of-the-mill virus and to keep him home and do self-care. Was told to bring him in if he got worse but not to worry. I went to work the next day and told my co-workers the story of my neighbor's request and they were shocked. I had one co-worker suggest that I send an email to my homeowners to explain what happened just to get it on record because it was such an odd request. I took her advice and typed up an email that day when I was at lunch and sent it. For those who want to know, it was just an FYI email, not a complaint email. It basically stated that my neighbor made a request to park on my property and when I declined, he got mad at me and I wanted it on record just in case anything ever happens. So very glad I did. So, Friday comes and my youngest son has been home sick since Tuesday afternoon. When I got home Friday evening, I checked him and he had begun to run a fever and was complaining of several other things. I had been doing self-care with him since Tuesday and he didn't appear to be getting any better. Around 7 p.m., I decided to take him back to minor emergency and loaded him up in the car. I opened my garage door and I was absolutely shocked to see that very big F-350 sitting in my driveway, blocking me. I can't describe to you how angry I was to see that vehicle sitting there. Now before anyone starts asking me how I didn't know it was in my driveway, it's because my street is very busy and cars are coming and going all the time and unless someone knocks on my door, I don't bother watching every vehicle that drives up and down the street. The only window that can see my driveway are the ones in my kitchen and I keep those curtains drawn and never look out of them. So, I get out of my car and stomp over to my neighbor's house and bang on their door. The mother of TH house answers the door and this is the conversation. Mom, irritated and kind of angry, can I help you? You are interrupting our dinner. Me, your son is parked in my driveway after I told your husband he couldn't. I need to take my son to minor emergency and that truck is blocking me in. It's at this time that Dad walks up behind Mom and proceeds to talk. Dad, he isn't blocking you in, you can get around him. Me, no I can't. You need to move that truck or I'm going to call the police and a tow truck. I need to get my son in to see a doctor. Dad, turning to call for his son and then turning back to me, he's not blocking you but I will have him move it. Me, it doesn't matter whether you believe he is blocking me in or not. He is not allowed to park in my driveway. No one is allowed to park in my driveway and if I find an unauthorized vehicle parked in my driveway again, I'm not going to bother to knock on your door, I'm going to have it towed. It was at this time I saw the son arrive at the door with His keys in his hands, and I turned to leave and head to my car to wait for him to move it, and I heard him call me that famous B word every woman has heard at least once in her life. I ignored him and headed to my car and watched as he got in, and after some effort finally was able to back out of my driveway and parked his truck in the street a little way down the road. I was able to leave and take my son to minor emergency. But what my neighbors did next infuriated me to a point where I knew had to do something. I would make sure that they would regret their actions.
My girlfriend cheated with my best friend, so I ruined both their lives at once. My wife Rachel and I grew up in a largish town of close to 30,000 people. We knew each other at an early age and we were practically inseparable. At 16 we started dating each other. When we turned 18, we moved away for work in a city just a few hours drive away. By 20 we were married and had bought our first house. At 22 we discovered that she was pregnant with a boy. About 5 weeks before she was due to go on maternity leave, a large shelving unit collapsed and crushed her. I was told that both her and our child were killed instantly. 2 of her colleagues had also been injured in the accident, one left paralyzed, the other losing his leg after it had to be amputated. The company she was working for had decided to continue using old shelving that had been written off as unsafe instead of replacing it so that they could cut costs. I still haven't quite forgiven those executives and management personnel that made that decision, because they cut short my wife's life and unalived our unborn child. It wasn't long after I was told I had a choice on how to proceed with what her company called compensation, but I called it blood money. They wanted to settle out of court to avoid a lawsuit. I on the other hand was out for their blood. Fortunately, due to the media coverage that it got and the involvement of several politicians, the case was settled quickly in court and the payout for all parties was close to 10 times the amount that they had initially offered. A lot of fines were given to them for breaches on work, health and safety, executives were sacked and others were jailed. At this time, I was still working my job in telecommunications. My mother had moved in while all this was happening to help me. I think I would have fallen apart if she hadn't been as involved as she was. It was around this time that I was offered a promotion, but it involved a lot of travel around the state. I made a request to have an office in my hometown's branch, as I wanted to not only take care of businesses in the state, but also in my hometown, as there was no business representative located there, to which they agreed. After a few months, we settled into a routine of 1 to 2 weeks in the city office, 1 week in my hometown and 1 to 2 weeks visiting the rest of the state. After a year, I decided to buy a house in my hometown so I wasn't having to stay at my parents' place every week and that I could come and go as I pleased. It is about 4 years later that our story begins. I had just returned from one of my trips on Friday, and was checking in some stuff at my office when Harry, the branch's managing director, walked in. We had grown up together too, but had gone to different schools. Since coming back we had developed a very close friendship. He asked how things were, and then asked me if I wanted to come to a house party that he was having that evening. Short notice, but I said yes. I felt like a few drinks with friends were in order. It was there that Harry introduced me to Catherine. She was a new hire at the branch where my hometown's office was located and was getting to know everyone being new in town. We hit it off immediately. As much of a cliché as it sounds, it was almost as if my old wife was in front of me, instead of Catherine. I won't bore you too much with the details, but after 2 years of dating, we decided to take the next step and she moved into my hometown. Everything up to this point had been going really well. Catherine and my parents got along and Rachel's parents also approved and were happy that someone could make me just as happy as Rachel had done. All was going well for close to a year when things began to change. Skype sessions were cut short suddenly. Neighbors would tell me about how a car, described to me like it was Harry's, was always seen parked in the back alley near my house whenever I was away, and some clothes that weren't mine were in my wardrobe. All signs pointed to her cheating, but she said that nothing was happening. She said that Harry would come over occasionally to discuss business but never stayed the night. I chalked it up to me being paranoid and continued on as if nothing was wrong, but there was always this feeling that something wasn't right. It was close to 6 months later that I discovered that she had been lying to me. I had just finished closing a rather large contract with a new company and negotiations had wrapped up earlier than I had anticipated. So instead of sticking around for the next few days, I decided to pay for an early flight home and surprise everyone. Fast forward a few hours and I drive into my hometown and down the alley behind my house so that I could get into the house without being seen and surprise Catherine. Some part of me was also curious as to whether this mystery car was there. Sure enough, there was a car that was blocking the back entrance gate. I was confused for a moment, wondering if it had just been a neglectful neighbor parking, only to realize that it was indeed Harry's car. Pulling up behind his car, I got out and thought it was strange that he was there so late, as she claimed that he always had left by now. As I approached the back of the house I saw something that made my stomach drop. In my kitchen, Catherine and Harry were going at it hammer and tong. I froze. Time stopped. There was my closest friend, having intimacy on my kitchen bench with my girlfriend. I didn't know what to do. So many questions were running through my head. Was this real or was I dreaming? Why were they having intimacy in my house? Feeling defeated, I turned and left without them seeing me. I sat in my car for what felt like an eternity. I was crying hard. But the sadness quickly turned into anger. The same kind of anger I felt towards those that were responsible for Rachel's death. I wanted to hurt them. As a pacifist, I don't believe in violence. It was then I knew I was going to punish them and destroy their lives. And what better time to start than now? I moved my car back up the alley, far enough away from my driveway that I could still see Harry's car, and then walked back to the gate where I could see into the house, and called her phone. They were still going for it when it rang. They both looked at the caller ID and did a double take when my name came up. I could see that she was considering answering it and they let it ring out. After a few moments they were back into it again and I dialed once again. This time she answered. As she was answering, I hung up and made my way back to my car. As soon as I did, she called me back. She asked why I was calling as late as I was, and I told her that I was about 10 minutes from home and didn't want to scare her coming in. She, obviously, was shocked and acted happy that I was coming, and the call ended very quickly after she said she was going to get up and get changed into something. I said bye and hung up. A few moments later, Harry came peeling through the gate and still half naked, jumped into his car and took off like a bat out of hell. I smiled a little, knowing the fear that both of them would be feeling from being so close to being caught. I waited a few moments before turning my car into the same place Harry had been moments earlier. The night was fairly uneventful afterwards, and it wasn't until after she was asleep that I got up and went to my office down the hall. I couldn't sleep. I needed to plan. And plan I did.
My boyfriend keeps getting into fistfights with the chef at Waffle House on purpose. This is some Family Guy stuff. So my boyfriend and I have been together for 3 years. Due to both of our degrees and attending the same college, we make a fairly nice combined income. Our income is relevant because we could afford to eat somewhere nice when we're out and about, but he always wants breakfast food. When he was a child, his dad couldn't stand eating breakfast-type food in the afternoon or evenings, so his mom would make him waffles, pancakes, eggs and bacon in the evening whenever his dad was busy or out of town. It's a wonderful and safe memory for him. My boyfriend is an incredibly nice and caring person. He's emotionally tuned into everyone and recognizes arising issues a long time before they occur. He loves animals, and is kind and gentle with every bug, bird and pet that he comes across. He's almost always willing to turn the other cheek in social situations where somebody tries to insult him or get aggressive towards him, and usually winds up diffusing the situation and having a productive discussion about whatever the issue was. Except at Waffle House. Anytime we're out, he wants to go to the same goddamn Waffle House and get breakfast food. I'm not a big eater, so I used to not really care. I would just drink coffee and read my book while he enjoyed his food. But that became impossible once he and this one cook started chirping at each other every time we went there. My boyfriend complained about his eggs one time, because he likes them a little runny and they were served hard. The cook responded by giving him scrambled eggs. When he brought it up again, the cook served him 2 hard-boiled eggs. I think it was just part of the cook's shtick, and it was kind of funny, but my boyfriend wasn't able to laugh it off. When we left, he was in kind of a bad mood, but we didn't really talk about it. The next week we were out getting some shopping done, and he wanted to go to Waffle House again. I suggested that we try out a different place, or at least a different Waffle House location, but he only wanted the same Waffle House. We went in and sat down, and once again the same cook served his eggs wrong. My boyfriend sort of snapped at him that he wasn't interested in messing around, and just wanted the correct eggs. The cook then served him a piece of toast with a hole cut out in the middle with a fried egg in it. My boyfriend got really mad and threw the egg toast at the cook, which made the cook come around from behind the bar and throw it back at him. They ended up fighting until my boyfriend was like, "This is crap," and walked out. Nobody got hurt, but the few other people in there were watching and laughing a bit. This is the crazy part: my boyfriend keeps going back and ordering eggs and getting into fistfights with the same cook. It's almost a ritual at this point. My boyfriend orders runny eggs, the cook serves him some other version of eggs, and then they beat the crap out of each other. I quit going with him after the second fight, but he kept going by himself. They physically fought like 6 or 7 times over this. I've tried to talk to him about it a few times, but he keeps saying it's a matter of principle. I've told him to talk to the manager or something like that, but he just waves me off. Apparently that cook hasn't yet made him the correct runny eggs, but it's like he spends the week learning new ways of preparing eggs to tick my boyfriend off. The thing is, we're getting married this summer. He's accepted a job in a new city and it'll be easy for me to find work after the wedding, so we'll be moving away from his sworn enemy Waffle House guy. My misogynist boyfriend called me an unattractive bitch, so I installed Tinder and matched with his dad. Ever since the start of this year, my boyfriend has been turning into a misogynist and constantly degrading me. But he ended up getting effed by his own karma. My boyfriend used to be the perfect Prince Charming when we began dating. He asked me out in front of the entire school with a giant sign that said he has been in love with me for months. He would take me out on dates every weekend, and we would visit every romantic place in town. In fact, our friends literally called us the template couple. As in, we had the relationship that everyone else wanted. We introduced each other to our parents. I was very anxious that day, however, my dad absolutely loved him. It's like they became best friends in a matter of days. My parents sat me down and told me that I needed to stay loyal to this man, because he would take very good care of me. And I couldn't agree more. When we entered college, my dad helped him get a really good job/internship at his company. It helped him a lot as he was now self-sufficient and he even moved out of his parents' house. However, everything changed at the start of 2023. He randomly began watching a lot of videos on Instagram and YouTube that were clearly posted by other misogynists, specifically someone with the initials at. The videos talked about how he had to take charge in the relationship, or else I would undermine his authority. They also had other comments that were very degrading, and should at all costs be avoided. I desperately tried to keep my boyfriend away from these things. I would actively call him to go to parties and on dates so he wouldn't have time to go through social media. I would show up to his house with food and drinks, and try to monitor his online activity. I even tried to initiate intimacy with him, more often to keep him away from those podcasts and videos. But as time went on, my efforts proved to be more and more useless. It's as if he no longer wanted to spend time with me. He would constantly make excuses to avoid hanging out with me, and would instead spend his time drinking and partying with his friends, doing things that only singles should be doing. He also said a lot of mean things to me, like I was bothering him and getting in the way of his success. I tried to sit him down and have a proper conversation about his future, but he blew me off, saying that his future was not my concern. The day after that, he quit his job and instead invested all his money into a trading account. That didn't last long at all, however, since he lost the money almost immediately. I had to explain to my dad and cover for him, saying that he got a better offer for a job and didn't want to make things awkward, so he left without a word. I was really sad and used to cry a lot during this time, because I thought that my relationship was breaking apart. One day, I decided to once again initiate intimacy with him in an attempt to make him listen to me. But he did something that my sweet boyfriend would have never done. He shouted at me, telling me to leave him alone and that he didn't want to have intimacy with me. In his eyes, I was an unattractive beach who should be happy that he settled for me. That hurt me, but I didn't give up so easily. I told him to cut it out, and that his misogynistic attitude isn't good for him or the people around him. He absolutely did not settle for me and was clearly being manipulated. I was honestly reaching my breaking point. Breakup seemed closer than ever, but I still wanted to make it work. I still wanted to marry my high school sweetheart, and I wanted to be the girl who saved him when he was on a dangerous path. I told him my concerns, and gave him a day to think about it. I said that he needed to give me a clear answer and start working on his future. Depending on his answer, I was going to break up with him even though I still loved him. But to my surprise, he didn't take my warning seriously at all and instead gave me a ridiculous suggestion. He proposed that we should enter an open relationship where we can sleep with other partners. That came so out of nowhere that I didn't know how to respond. I was so taken aback that my first response was, "Where would you even find other partners?" Apparently, he was waiting for that moment. He showed me that he had opened a Tinder account, and already matched with women that he found attractive. When he said that, I felt a pang in my heart, because I remembered when he said I was unattractive to him. A fire lit inside me and I wanted to get back at him for that. I was done making excuses for his terrible behavior. I decided that I would copy him and get on Tinder as well. If he didn't want to listen to my words, then he would have to deal with my actions. I uploaded a few photos of mine that I thought were nice enough and waited for matches. To be brutally honest, my self-esteem was really low after what my boyfriend said, and I wasn't expecting anyone to like me. But out of nowhere, I came across my boyfriend's dad on Tinder. That really took me for a ride, since I knew he was still happily married and had no reason to cheat. Also, he had met me before, so he should have known that I'm his son's girlfriend. But curiosity got the better of me, and I swiped right. Lo and behold, we matched, and he texted me within literal seconds.
What is the craziest transformation from someone at your high school? It was when I was a teenager. I was a short, kinda fat, nerdy kid with acne, braces, and long, greasy hair like Kurt Cobain. For some effing reason I cannot, as an adult, fathom, I decided I wanted a perm to look like Gavin Rossdale, except I was still a kinda fat kid with a kinda fat face, so I just looked like a fat kid with shitty, dirty, curly hair. It was effing terrible. Now, before you hit reply and bang out the same bullshit that I hear all the time when I tell this story, everyone goes through an ugly duckling phase, you're no different, hear me out. I was not your average ugly duckling turned swan. I was a 1/10. I was effing hideous. Like, girls wouldn't audibly say ew if I so much as smiled at them, sometimes if I just made eye contact. It was debilitating for my fragile teenage psyche, and extremely humiliating and emasculating. I couldn't even get my friend girls to hook me up with any of their friends. My teenage personality didn't help anything. I was one of those attention-seeking loud kids who made horrible jokes and hoped people would laugh with me instead of at me for once. Seriously, I was a fucking greasy, pimply, fat, loudmouth little troglodyte. That was my life for 3 years, from age 12 through age 15, a social outcast, a dweeb, a dork, a loser, throwing all of them at me cause there ain't nothing new. When I started my first semester of my sophomore year in high school, I was taking Smart Kid Trig. There was a jock in my class, a kid named Jay, who wasn't really smart enough to be in the Smart Kid classes, but was probably too smart for the regular classes, so here he was, struggling along with things I found easier than a tutorial level in video games. Through some twist of fate or good fortune, or most likely because our last names start with the same first 2 letters, Jay sat behind me in that trig class. Jay wasn't above cheating, and I wasn't above whoring out my brains for a pretend friend, so we got along like cupcakes and frosting. About a month into the semester, Jay asked me, "Hey, optical delusions, you ever had a girlfriend?" Up until this point, Jay and I had never talked about anything other than how awesome he was at everything, which was really more Jay talking and me nodding along, or trig. I didn't really know how to respond. I mean, I obviously hadn't had a girlfriend, but that's not the kind of information you let out easily when you're on the bottom tier of the high school food chain. And no, girls don't really like me. I squeaked out, trying to keep my normally loud voice hushed to a whisper without cracking. "Puberty is the effing worst, dude. When do you get those braces off?" Jay was staring at my face, judging every crack, every pockmark, every pimple, everything. I could feel it, but it didn't feel the same as when the pretty girls would do it. He wasn't reeling in horror for starters, and he seemed to be inspecting me instead of rejecting me. In about a month, but then I have to get retainers and depending on how my palate expander worked I may knee stop. Dude, don't talk about your braces and shit, no one cares. I never did know when to shut up. Oh right, ha 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 ha, sorry Jay. My already red from the acne and topical creams face turning a shade of beet. I was overcompensating for oversharing. I was really awkward. Can you get a ride home an hour after school ends? His inquiry seemed earnest, and didn't feel like he was going to tie me to the flagpole or give me an atomic wedgie. It felt like he wanted to help. I probably can. Yeah, why? Come to the weight room with me after school. Football team does weight training and we're allowed to bring in one underclassman outsider to try out for a couple weeks. If you make it, you can try out for the squad next year. I don't know how to work out. Jay, the forced grin had disappeared from my face, replaced by a half frown of dejection, knowing full well that I could barely lift myself up on the chin-up bar more than twice. I wasn't going to fare well in the weight room with kids twice my size. Don't worry dude, I got you. And he slapped me on the back hard enough to half knock the wind out of me. I smiled at him, not forced this time, it felt real. All of it felt real. Over the next year, I got the braces off, cut my shitty hair, and hit the gym so fucking hard that I went from 150 pounds of squishy preteen flub to 165 pounds of rock fucking solid muscle and under 10% body fat or some poop. The jocks starting giving me high fives in the halls. I was dubbed the leprechaun.